Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Caleb. I'm a video producer for the Sam Noble Museum. Today, I'm visiting the Wichita Mountain Wildlife Refuge to learn more about their bison management program, and I have a fantastic guest with me. Could you tell us your name and your role here?
My name is Dan McDonald, and my role here at the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge is I'm the lead wildlife biologist.
Could you give us a brief history of the bison management program here at the refuge?
The bison management program here on the refuge has quite a long history. Bison were originally brought to the refuge in 1907. 15 animals were brought from, of all places, New York City. They came from the Bronx Zoo. And those 15 animals started the nucleus herd that we now enjoy today. Management of this herd has changed quite significantly over that time period, and currently we manage the bison based on their genetics conservation of this bison herd. We manage them not only just by ourselves, but it's part of a metapopulation. A metapopulation are geographically separated smaller populations. And so we manage our herd along with 4 or 5 other National Wildlife Refuge herds. Animals move around between herds from time to time to conserve those genetics. We manage for as much genetic diversity as we can on the refuge. Each year we have to dispose of animals. We only have the capacity or carrying capacity, basically enough forage for the animals to eat each year. And so in order to not overgraze the refuge and cause habitat damages, we need to reduce our population. And so disposal of animals on the refuge is through 100% donation. We donate animals, bison, to various tribes in Oklahoma and across the country. We've donated to a number of tribes in Oklahoma, North Dakota, Montana, Iowa, and New Mexico, just to name a few. And each year, animals are all gathered up. We collect the information from the bison that we need, and then tribes come to the refuge and pick up their donated animals.
What are some of the long-term goals for the program here?
So the long-term goals of the bison management program here on the refuge are to continue to do the genetics conservation and continue to work with other partners within the Department of Interior, other refuges that manage bison, some national parks that manage bison, and possibly even tribal partners as tribes get their herds up and running and to a point to where they are also doing some conservation genetics. And so we will continue to do that. And there's been a lot of research over the last, probably close to a decade on the genetics conservation in bison. I think it was in 2015, 2016, the Department of Interior, Wildlife Refuges, national parks, and some other partners worked on some research with a population viability analysis. What that looked at was genetics from all the various herds that participated in the project, and they did various models to predict in the future what the best management strategies and approaches would be to conserve the genetics that we all have. That included random removals, targeted removals of various genetics within herds, and then also the addition of genetics to various herds over time. And they looked at all these different models to figure out what is the best strategy to use in order to conserve as much genetics as possible within all these different herds. And so we will continue to work in that direction, and as we collect more data and learn more on genetics, those might be tweaked or changed a little bit, but we'll continue to conserve genetics. Animals will move from our refuge to other places, and then we'll receive bison from other refuges to help support the genetic diversity of our herd so that we can manage the genetics as best we can.
Has DNA technology made a strong impact on bison management here? Would you say it's a game changer?
Yeah, genetic conservation is definitely a game changer as far as conservation goes. With not only bison, but lots of other species are focused more on genetics because just the history of bison and other species, they were decimated and had such small numbers, big bottlenecks, genetics term, where you went from a very large population with bison. They estimate there may have been 20 to 40 million bison ranging across North America back before the West was settled and their numbers declined significantly. And so you go from a very large number to very few. They estimate maybe around 1,000 animals were left in North America. And so you take that genetic pool from huge to really small, you lose a lot in that happening. And then when these various federal herds were started, you took that neck and you necked it down even smaller. For us, for instance, with 15 animals. And so genetics is very important to be able to manage so that, because it can lead to other things. Inbreeding, you get inbreeding, eventually you can have some deformities in animals. You get to a point to where they're not even able to reproduce if the inbreeding gets to a certain level. And so if you can't reproduce, sooner or later you're not going to have much of a herd. And so that's why genetics is so important. And a lot of it is man-caused. I mean, we're the ones that decimated a lot of these various populations. And so now we're trying to do our very best to manage these various populations. And from the research that's been done, genetics conservation seems to be one of the best strategies for managing these types of wild populations.
Could you touch on how genetic information and technology are used here at the refuge? What are some of the processes? How do you track the bison?
So the way that we manage the genetics, so on the refuge and most public herds with national parks or wildlife refuges, animals are free to roam and be wild and able to breed with whomever they choose, just kind of the natural processes. And so we humans, or managers at these places don't play a role in as far as targeting which animals we want to breed with whom. And so we let nature do its own thing, and animals are free to breed with whoever they like. As far as the genetics management side of that goes, so each year we capture as many of our bison as possible. They get gathered up and ultimately brought through a corral handling facility that we have here on the refuge. And each animal, if it doesn't already, gets a microchip, a pit tag, that identifies that particular animal. And then when we collect genetic information from those animals, when that analysis is complete, that information gets tied back to that pit tag number. And then when animals come through subsequent years, we scan that animal, check its chip, and then we know the genetics of that animal. And then prior to that, the genetic analysis is the genetics are looked at, and we determine based on what we have, what we want to keep and what we want to dispose of. The animals that may be determined to be surplus animals and ultimately donated are those that represent genetically, are well represented within our herd. The ones that we retain on the refuge are those that may be more unique to us, might be rare overall as far as the metapopulation goes, might be just unique to our refuge. Those are the ones that we retain here, but overall we want to manage for as much diversity in our herd as possible. And then as we manage with other herds, the metapopulation, genetics that aren't represented in our herd would be ones that we might want to bring in here to increase that diversity and get genetics that aren't already represented here at the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge.
Is the decision to donate or keep a specific bison made based on its genetic profile?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, potentially. It all just depends on the overall diversity of our herd, and where we kind of stand, and how many of the genetics that we look at, is that animal well represented across the herd genetically, or is it one that may have genetics that are not as well represented in our herd? As far as genetics go, they're not good or bad. It's just what we have, and we don't know what they represent. If those genetics are for long hair, short hair, big horns, little horns, long life, short life. We don't know any of that type of information. We just know what we have, and whether or not it's well represented in our herd or not as represented in our herd. And so the ones that are more unique or rare within our herd are the ones that we would retain, and those that are more common would be the ones that potentially could be surplus animals.
Could you give us some information on whether or not bison will naturally crossbreed?
Yeah. Doesn't naturally happen, but in our bison genetics, there is evidence that one point in time, way back probably in the early 1900s or maybe late 1800s, there's remnants of some of those crossbreeding and hybridization of domestic livestock and bison, but it was all, man-centered. We were the ones that were doing it. They don't naturally do it.
Being a keystone species, could you describe why the bison play such an important role here at the refuge?
Yeah, bison play a big role in just the ecology of grasslands. Back before Europeans were here on this continent, bison roamed and ranged all over the place, and they were a natural part of the grassland ecosystems, and also can be considered a keystone species, just because of the way that they move and they graze and create kind of a mosaic of different type of habitats within a grassland, just with the behavior and their grazing patterns. Areas that they graze heavily in, real short grass that might be preferred by various grassland species, and then areas that they haven't grazed yet or grazed lightly provide a different type of habitat for other types of songbirds and other types of species that might prefer short grass as opposed to tall grass. And so they create a mosaic of different habitat types as they move across the landscape. With their trampling and their grazing, and then their bison wallows, those create little micro ecosystems. When we get rain, those depressions fill up with water. You can have some unique plant life within those little ecosystems. Also reptiles or amphibians will use those. Frogs will use those small little pools to go through their breeding cycle. And so even beyond just the grazing that they do, their wallows create other little micro ecosystems as bison move across the refuge, or historically moved all across the Great Plains of North America.
Do you have an estimate of how many bison are currently on the refuge, and what is it like to take part in managing the bison population?
So the number of bison that we currently manage here on the refuge is about 550. We know that from counts that we do annually, and then also as we do our annual capture operations, we get a vast majority of the bison caught. And so we have a pretty good idea of the total number of bison here on the refuge as we go from year to year and manage those numbers. Was a follow-up to that?
How does it feel to take part in managing the population here?
Okay. Managing this bison population is, we're a small part in what the Department of Interior calls the Bison Conservation Initiative. It's with all agencies within the Department of Interior that manage bison. So, big picture, we're part of a much larger project, if you will, of conserving bison in North America. We're one small part of it, but it's great to be able to to support the Department of Interior and to support bison management. We're just a small player in that, but it's neat to be able to be a part of something much larger than just here at the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge.
Could you describe what it's like to work as a biologist on a wildlife refuge like this one?
What it's like to work as a biologist on a refuge is it's a great job. We work with a wide variety of different animals, from the bison to Rocky Mountain elk, white-tailed deer. We do projects with a number of different songbirds. The black-capped vireo is one of those birds. We also do work with the Texas horned lizard. We do habitat work. We do invasive plant work. We do fisheries work, fish stocking, stream surveys. So really there's just such a great diversity of things that we work with that it doesn't become monotonous. We're not doing the same thing over and over and over. As the seasons change, the work that we do changes. And so, that helps keep it interesting and fun and, just a great job to be able to come out here every day and do something different very often.
Dan, that's all the questions we have today. That's a wrap. Thank you.
All right.